This podcast is brought to you by CBD One. Experience the world's finest CBD, crafted for purity, potency, and balance. Every drop is made with the highest quality, full spectrum extracts, 100% natural and expertly formulated. Water soluble, fast acting and absorbing, effortlessly added to your favorite drinks. Support your body, mind, and well-being with nature's most powerful plant extract. Unlock the power of premium CBD. Shop now at cbd-one.co.uk.
Hi everyone, I am delighted to say that I have with me here today Golden Harper. And Golden has a fascinating story to tell, really interesting, and it starts from the ground up with your feet. And I heard Golden in an interview on another podcast called Tetragrammaton with Rick Rubin, really fascinating, and it just caught my interest. It really, truly, it chimed with me, Golden. You can get hold of Golden after this if you're interested. It's Run Golden One. That's all his handles on all the socials. So if you're curious, interested, you can look him up. Now, Golden, let's start with your childhood. What did you want to be when you were growing up?
From a pretty young age, I was pretty sure I wanted to manage my family's running store, or work in the footwear industry to some degree
Really?
or another. Yeah,
And
or a
so
professional runner.
yeah, so the background there then with your family. Then tell me about your family and their store.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, both my parents come from families that were not active, basically sedentary.
Okay.
When we show up to family reunions, people were kind of like, "Oh, who are the skinny people?" Uh, we kind of stuck out like a sore thumb. And
Oh wow.
but my mom started playing sports in high school, and then she started running, and she became very, very good. And my dad had a similar story. He started playing sports in high school and was actually drafted to play pro baseball by the Angels.
Wow.
Um, and But he was a great football player as well. Blew his knee out playing football. Completely lost his meniscus, cartilage, bone
Really?
on bone, and was told he would never walk normal again, which has been true, and was told he would never run again.
Okay.
This is in the 70s, so
So this was
technology.
before he became a runner.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And yeah, and so what essentially happened is he got challenged to run the Las Vegas Marathon, and his roommate's dad sent him a postcard, and it said, "Hey, if you guys are real men, like if you're really tough guys, like you think you are, and my dad would jump off 100-foot cliffs, 30-meter cliffs into water. He even jumped a 27-meter cliff or a 90-meter cliff into 6 feet of water one time. Broken
What?
many bones, compressed lots of vertebrae. He's a couple inches shorter than he was when he was younger.
Why did he do that?
I think it's just a certain psyche. It's a mindset, right? I think
Okay.
for him, he couldn't play pro baseball and couldn't play pro football or
Yeah.
football, and so he made up for it by lifting really heavy weights and trying to break walls down and
Okay.
physical actual walls,
Wow.
and jumped off really big cliffs. I think in some ways, I don't know if he would say this, but I think it was a bit of a coping mechanism
Yeah.
for not being able to be a professional athlete anymore. And the president of the cliff jumping club was the guy who jumped from the highest height into the least amount of water. Basically, he once jumped 80 feet into 3 feet of water, which I think is like what 25 meters into 1 meter of water. So just
Did these
insane.
people live long?
No, no. I mean, my dad barely lived. He barely survived that one. So they had
Wow.
a technique where they would hit the water and scoop. But uh,
That's
yeah,
insane.
it was insane.
Do
So
you
that was
do
kind.
any of that?
What's that?
Have you ever gone anywhere near that stuff?
I've done some cliff jumping, but I make sure the water's really deep, and I think it gets less fun after 50 feet. For me at least, I feel like Jumping
I
from
can't do 10 feet, never mind 30. Come on.
yeah, yeah. I find some moderate cliff jump. I really love jumping from about 40 feet is really
Right.
fun.
Wow.
Especially if you get the water chopped up and whatnot. But you get much higher, and it's
Can I ask,
it's rock
what's
hard.
when you're in midair, right, and you're heading down,
Hmm.
right? What the hell is going on with your body? Are you like about to lose control of your bladder and bowel? Are you
I think you don't think about it. It's kind of like one, two, three. My dad would say, he would always just say 1, 2, 3 and go, and they don't
go?
think, you don't really think about it. And then when you're in the air, it's just like, oh my, I'm going really fast, and then you hit the water, and that's it. So you don't. There's not
So
a lot
it's
of
not
time to
about
really.
it's not
Yeah,
about
it's
thinking.
no, it's more like, okay, let's just make sure we hit the water clean, right? And
Wow.
this is where my dad got his nickname Hawk, because when he would jump from these really high heights, he would put his arms out and do this thing here.
Wow.
Um, so my dad has always gone by Hawk as long as I've known him,
Okay.
of course. And
Right.
so this was the mindset. And
Yes.
so when they get this postcard, and they're like, "Well, we're tough guys. We'll go do it," and it was like less than 3 months away, right? So, he- and this is back when a 4-hour marathon was the basement. That was about where you know, that was the back of the pack. There
Yeah.
was not many people beyond 4 hours. Now, I mean, 4 hours is faster than the middle of the pack, so
Yeah.
it's a different ballgame now. But
Yeah.
needless to say, it was excruciating for him. His knee was incredibly painful, and he ran with a limp the whole time. And he barely finished, and he finished at the back of the pack, but he finished.
Yeah.
And for the first time in a long time, he had come from being a professional level athlete. He wasn't just not very good; he was like the worst, and it pissed him off.
Okay.
He was just really angry about it, and so he signed up for another marathon. You know, very quickly, like 6 weeks later,
So
maybe
he's a man
less.
who won't be beaten.
Right, and he was beaten. The next race about killed him, and so on. And so this happened 5 or 6 times, where he just kept signing up. And eventually,
Incredible.
though, what happened is he found out that the great runners, they run really different than the rest of us.
Okay.
And along the way, he also saw the Kenyans run, and it was kind of like, you know what? Those guys, they float when they float down the road.
Yeah.
We all crash down the road. I crashed down the road. No wonder my
Yeah.
knee hurts.
I
I'll
just
bet.
thump along. Yeah.
I'll
Yeah.
bet if I learned to teach myself to run like those guys, my knee wouldn't hurt so bad.
Yeah.
He was also 240 pounds of solid muscle, and so huge guy. And so, to make a long story short,
Yeah.
within 7 years, he taught himself to run like a Kenyan. He went from uh, 4+ hour marathon to he ran 2 hours and 22 minutes at St. George and won the race in 1984. I was 2 years old. So this is a seven
Incredible.
year time period where this happened. And became world ranked and nationally ranked, and became a professional runner. Was paid to run by various companies, and he was actually working for Nike when I was born.
Wow.
And he left Nike because he felt like they were unethical. They put technology in the shoes that was injuring all the wear testers, and the wear
Shock absorbers and
testers,
thing.
yeah, the wear testers all said, we're getting injured and we feel like we're running 50% more.
Yeah.
You have to not put this in shoes. And Nike was like, we got your feedback, but the marketing's just too strong.
Yeah.
We'll literally sell billions of
Yeah.
this,
People love it.
and that was actually the air technology at the time,
Okay.
before it existed. And when they were willing to knowingly injure people,
Yeah.
uh, he left. And he said they all left. He said basically the entire every wear tester he knew left, that was being,
Wow.
the paid testers.
Because they're not listening.
Well, because they were willing to hurt people. They were
Yeah.
willing. They knew that people were getting injured, and they were fine with it to make money.
Yeah.
And so he left to Saucony. So most of my childhood, my dad was working for Saucony, and he managed the entire Western U.S. for Saucony sales. And then we opened the shoe store when I was 9,
Okay.
because working for Saucony, he was only home week and a half a month, and
Okay.
and then I came along, and then my sister came along,
Yeah.
and he thought, I can't do this. I
Yeah.
got to be home. I got to be
Yeah.
around these guys. I like them.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
um,
Blink and you've grown up.
yeah, 100%. And so we opened the shoe store when I was 9, Runner's Corner.
Can you
And
remember that? Can you remember it being opened?
oh, absolutely. I started working there right away.
So it must have been so exciting that.
It was really exciting. It was scary as all get out. I mean, I didn't understand the ramifications, but my parents mortgaged their house on the store. So if the store failed, we were going to lose the house.
Yeah.
Um, but when the store first opened, it was actually my dad and 5 friends. They all put in $500 and they worked their day off of work each week. And what happened in short order is, like, I started working right away, even though I was 9. And then when I was 10, they would leave me alone there sometimes because it was either close the store or, and they knew I could hold the fort down. I was a shoe geek, a foot nerd to the nth degree.
Wow.
People would come in and ask, like, "Hey, can I get some shoes?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure." And they're like, "Well, is there somebody here to help me?" And I'd be like, "Well, yeah, I'm right here." And they're like,
It's
"No,
me.
like somebody else," and they'd be like, they start to walk out, and I'd be like, "I can see you have some left foot eversion on that Saucony shoe with the ground reaction inertia device," you know, and they'd kind of turn around like, "All right, I'm listening."
Yeah.
So I knew my shoes inside and out. I knew feet pretty well,
Yeah.
even at age 10.
Amazing.
And but it's interesting in the shoe world, the running store world.
Yeah.
There's no formal training.
Okay.
So I
So
think
you
people
make
have
it up
this
as you
idea
go
now.
along.
Now, Runner's Corner, I own that store with my sister and my parents this to this day, and we're buying my parents out currently. But I think people think they go into a running store and it's so specialized and they have
Yeah.
all this training and cool
Yeah.
equipment and they do this analysis on you. It's all marketing BS. Like, it's there's no formal training. The
All
only
right.
training you get is from shoe companies and insole companies.
Yeah.
Well,
Saying.
that's not training, that's propaganda.
Yeah, of course.
It's a huge problem. And
So I didn't realize this. So when my patients go to, there's a couple of like small little running stores knocking about, and they
yeah,
say, "Yeah, I went in and was assessed."
yeah,
That assessment and most of that is probably just the marketing gadgets to sell product,
100%.
basically.
There are none of those scanners or systems,
Yeah.
at least those guys that use the formal systems, that are not that.
Wow.
They are all systems built to sell products,
I had no
um,
idea that it
and
was
they're
that cynical.
completely bunk. Like, I don't know if you guys use that
There's no
word, but
research
there's no
behind it.
research. And they're literally built like the foot scanners. I mean, this is the absurd thing to me. You go into a running store and they have you stand on a thing and they scan your foot and they say, "Oh, by standing on this thing, that tells us what shoe you should buy to run in."
Yeah.
Well, let's just think how absurd that is. By standing, you're going to buy a shoe to run in.
Hmm.
And this is one of the first things we always tell our customers is, "Hey, don't listen to us. Listen to your feet. And you should never judge this running shoe by how it feels standing or walking.
Yeah.
You should judge it by how it feels while you're running."
Yeah.
Same thing, walking shoe. You should only judge it by how it feels while you're walking.
Yeah.
Um, if you're getting a shoe for standing, fine. That's maybe a little different discussion, but most of those systems, the foot scanner systems, are built to sell insoles.
Yeah.
Which is a whole. It's weird because I'm anti-insole, but I
So am
started
I.
PR gear and we actually sell an insole,
Yeah.
but
Okay. Oh,
it's
shocking.
this insole with
I,
the idea to get rid of insoles.
yeah. So you
Um,
can. I think you can use them as a crutch for an
yeah,
injury. There's a time and a place, and
100%.
outside of that,
Yeah, I look at, like, the bridge soles we do is more of like an ankle brace. If you
yeah,
sprain your ankle, you wear the brace while you do the rehab,
yeah,
strengthen the area up, get it strong again, and then you can take the brace off. And the bridge
yeah.
soles are kind of the same thing for your feet. But I digress.
It's
Anyway,
okay.
back.
I just want to give you a little tale from my old tutor. Right, he was 96 years old. He'd been an osteopath over 70
Wow.
years, and I did a year postgraduate studying with him. And he said, if you put something rigid in the foot, you will get rigidity in the knee, hip, and lumbar spine. He absolutely said, you do not do this. So that ties in with what you're saying there, really.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, there can be a time and place for those things, like you
Yeah.
said,
Yeah.
but that shouldn't be the default,
No.
especially when the single best way to prevent running injuries, according to data, is foot strength.
Okay.
Runners that do a foot strengthening regimen are 242% less injured than those who don't.
Wow. So, how do you find out about these foot regimens then? What do you do?
It's really interesting. There's another study, and I love connecting these two together. And we actually do this at our shoe store. Is we tell people this because we don't want them to be injured.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of shoe companies and running shoe stores don't think this through. But our thought process is, if we can keep them healthy, that means they run more. And when they run more, they come back to us and buy more of everything,
Yeah.
not just shoes. Or whereas I think a lot of shoe stores think, oh, let's sell them the most expensive shoe, the most expensive insole, we'll maximize our profits. The problem is you get people in, for the most part, really expensive shoes and really expensive insoles. Those things weaken your feet. And again, statistically, if your feet are weak, you're far more likely to be injured
Yeah.
because you're not controlling forces at the ground level. Those forces have to go somewhere. They go up chain,
Yeah.
and then that's passed on to your shins, your knees, your hips, your low back, whatever.
Yeah.
So for us, we're always preaching this idea of we want you to be as injury free as possible, because that
Yeah.
means you're going to run more, and that's a win-win for everybody.
Of
There,
course.
the runner is happy, or the walker, whoever it happens to, the person buying the shoes is happy because they're not hurting, and we're happy because they're buying more stuff, and they're pretty happy about buying more stuff because it's stuff that just keeps them going rather than
Working.
spending money on medical bills.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, I mean, so there's this idea, and we try to keep it really simple. So again, this second study that we connect in is, there was this study done at Brigham Young University, and a couple others, and it's since essentially been repeated in different ways since. But basically, what they did is they had a group of people do all these foot strengthening exercises every single day, and then they had a group of people do no foot strengthening exercises, but they just either went barefoot, or they mostly wore a barefoot style shoe.
Yeah.
And I don't use the term barefoot shoe because I think it's an oxymoron.
Yeah.
Barefoot
Okay.
shoe doesn't make any sense, but a barefoot style shoe, meaning a shoe with no cushioning at all,
Yeah.
a shoe you can roll up in a ball. So I've got a pair of Splay shoes right here.
Nice.
Let's see.
Beautiful.
Anyways, Splay branded shoes, and this is what I'm talking about. You can take the shoe and essentially,
Let's have a
uh,
shoe off. Should we have
yeah,
a shoe off?
that looks like a Vivo Barefoot Raw. Is
Oh,
it?
stop it. Stop it. You're too good.
I have a pair of those myself.
Yeah.
I was wearing. Let's see. No, I wasn't. I was wearing a different Vivo yesterday. Um, but anyway, so they had these two groups, and interestingly enough, after a couple months, they measured their foot strength, and the group that had done foot strengthening exercises all day was basically no different than the group that just went barefoot or wore barefoot style shoes all day. So
Ah.
simply the act of ditching your overly cushioned, elevated heel, tapered toe box shoes, which is
Yeah. Yeah.
99% of all shoes out there,
Yeah.
and putting on a shoe that can roll up in a ball and has no cushioning and get your toes to spread out,
Yeah.
that act alone was similar to wearing regular shoes and doing a group of exercises. So you
Amazing.
asked me which one's easier.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm with
Yeah,
you
I
on
mean,
that.
obviously. So that's the thing, and at our running shoe store, we carry a bunch of barefoot style shoes for this
Yeah.
purpose.
Yeah.
Um, and now I always tell people, imagine if you did both. And I think the single easiest and best foot strengthening exercise people can do is to balance on one foot.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you can do that, you lift the heel just slightly off the ground, six to 12 millimeters off the ground.
Okay.
And that's called a single leg heel float. So
Yeah.
you're floating the heel off the ground. And that's an incredible foot strengthening exercise that simulates a lot of the stresses that you're going to have at mid stance all the way up to the hip.
Really.
And mid stance is essentially where most injuries occur because of what happens at mid stance. So
Really interesting.
this does the foot strengthening, and it also targets your weak areas, whatever those happen to be up to your hips. So if you have weak calves,
Yeah.
your calves are going to be on fire. If you have a weak glute stabilizer
Okay.
muscle, which most people do, you're going to be feeling that while you're doing this exercise.
Okay. And how long
S-
do you hold that for?
As long as you can. The goal is to work up to holding that for 90 seconds, and
Right.
you have to be pretty elite to get there.
I'm trying that
That
tonight.
Yeah, I mean, for most people I work with can't do it for 3 seconds. Um,
Gosh.
they they just can't.
And why is that, Golden? Why can't people do what should come naturally, really, which it should really, shouldn't it? So
Yeah.
what's happened to their feet to cause this?
So their feet have, for most people, you've been in shoes your whole life, and I was no different 15 years ago.
Yeah,
My feet looked like the Sauconys and Asics and Brooks shoes that I wore all the time.
of course.
Meaning, the single, in my opinion, the single most important feature of a shoe is that the big toe can be straight. Okay,
Yeah,
and if you look at any traditional footwear, the big toe is bent in,
yeah,
and when the big toe is bent in, the arch can't work right. And then we add to the mix that almost all shoes have an elevated heel.
yeah,
Whether you see it or not, it's in there. And when the heel is elevated, that further compresses the heel towards the forefoot, and um, that also makes the arch not be able to work.
so you're
So when
losing
you're
your
in a
protection.
typical shoe, your arch cannot function. Your foot cannot function like a foot, and when that big toe is bent in,
Yeah,
you're not able to drive power through it and hold balance on it.
right.
And for most people, they've been in a shoe, they take a shoe off, their foot still looks like that. Look down at your feet. Is your big toe in a straight line, or it should not be in at all?
Yeah,
And I would say 90% of American adults, their big toe is bent in, or not just American, but 90% of first world adults that wear shoes on a regular basis, um, that big toe is bent in to some degree or another.
yeah.
Uh,
Their feet have gone like kind of like this in
Yeah, and
narrow.
by the time we get to elderly ages, retirement age, the vast majority of people, their big toe is severely bent in, or they have a bunion. And in the case of women, it's close to, I would say statistically, most retirement age women have a bunion or a fairly severe hallux valgus, meaning the big toe is
Yeah,
bent in
yeah,
severely.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and, again, we always say your feet come to look like the shoes you wear. And the more your feet look like shoes, the more your feet hurt.
yeah.
And the more problems you have up chain as well. Because that elevated heel changes your posture for the worse. It
Totally.
changes your knee's ability to bend and do the things it's supposed to do.
Yeah,
And same thing with your feet. When your toes can hit the ground and spread out, they they absorb the impact, and they take up forces there at that ground level. They provide stability, and
yeah,
when you're not getting that, you know, then those things have to go somewhere,
yeah. They do.
and they go up. So that causes its own set of problems.
How did our feet shoes become so badly designed for our feet then?
Yeah, so there's a number of ways we got here,
Yeah.
but I think the main one started over in Europe, particularly as horse riding became popular, and it's really no different than today, where pop culture influences things, right?
Okay.
And the heroes today are actors and are musicians and all these people, right? The heroes back then would have been the military, the nobles,
Yeah.
kings, etc. And the common folk would see these people and imitate them more or less. And again, what happened is we got stirrups on horses,
Yeah.
and somebody figured out it's easier to get into stirrups if if the shoe is pointy. So they
Makes
made
sense.
horse riding boots, and the horse riding boots have that taper to them, to slide into that stirrup. And then they also added that heel on the back so that you would stop when you hit the right part of the stirrup to get perfect balance on there.
Yeah.
Um, and so 99% of us today, we're not walking around in walking shoes. We're actually walking around in modified horse riding boots.
Wow.
That's the reality of the situation, because what happened is the common folks saw their heroes riding through the streets and their royalty riding through the streets, and thought, well, I'm going to imitate that. So they started to build shoes to imitate those horse riding boots, essentially, and so on and so forth. I mean, again, there's a number of ways we got here, down through time. Now, shoes were very non-compliant until the last 50 to 100 years. And as a result, those shoes couldn't be worn for like very long periods of time. And so people generally wore their moccasin-like shoes, or another example would be like Dutch clogs, right?
Yeah.
Just big rounded, things, and that's what they would wear the majority of the time if they wore shoes at all.
Yeah.
And then, but again, you would have these things. So there's this idea of a high end, nice shoe was really a horse riding boot.
Okay.
And then we get to the 1960s, and Nike comes along. And to this point, this had not really been the shape had been adopted to some degree in athletic shoes, but the heel had not. Shoes had no cushioning. There was no foam in shoes.
Right.
And
Okay.
Bill Bowerman knew that there's two ways to get faster. You increase stride rate or you increase stride length. And he thought, all right, I'm going to tell my runners to, you've probably heard this phrase, lengthen their stride.
Yeah.
So he was physically teaching the runners to overstride, which we know causes massive injuries. And we now know that doesn't work at all. Stride length is actually a result of being in better shape. It's a result of having better mechanics. You can't if you try and get a longer stride just by trying to get a longer stride, you end up overstriding and you end up slowing yourself down, and it causes a lot of pain.
Wow.
And Bowerman's athletes said to him, well, coach, when I do that, my heels hurt.
Yeah.
Now imagine you're running down the sidewalk or the road or the track, and you're doing this in a shoe with no foam at all, no cushioning.
Yeah.
And you're trying to reach out and have these big strides out in front of your body.
Yeah.
And Bowerman thought, okay. So he goes and finds these Onitsuka shoes, Tiger, which became Asics, in Japan, that had foam. And he only brought back the ones that had foam in the heel, because he's working with elite athletes. He wants the lightest shoe possible. And if you put foam in the whole shoe, the shoe's heavier. And now imagine you've never felt foam in a shoe before.
Yeah.
This is what happened to America and quickly the whole world shortly thereafter. Is Bowerman introduces these shoes, and nobody's felt foam and soft, cushy in their shoe before. And it's only in the heel. And people put the shoes on for the first time. Imagine you stand up and you feel that gushy, soft foam. You're like,
Wow.
oh my gosh,
Yeah.
that feels so comfortable.
Yeah.
Little do you know, it's made the back half of the shoe heavier now,
Yeah.
which changes your stride biomechanics. Little do you know, it has extended off that part of the foot. So when the foot comes out to get underneath the body, it actually catches the ground about 3 inches earlier than it otherwise would.
Yeah.
And so those two things are a problem. But again, nobody looked at that
No.
because it was so cool.
Yeah.
It was so, wow, this feels amazing to have that gush there,
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it was springy back then. It was
Maybe
just
not.
like, it just wasn't rock hard rubber, and it wasn't paper thin. And again, it's just in the heel there. And so that became very popular very, very quick. I mean, Nike went from nothing to, this would never happen today because there's so much competition.
Yeah.
Back then, I mean, there's a handful of shoe companies that controlled everything. They were all doing the exact same thing. And Nike comes in and says, soft, cushy foam in your heel, and everybody's like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
and this just blows up. And in the words of a very seasoned engineer at Nike that I worked with, he said, we didn't do any research. Nobody else did any research. All we knew is it made millions and millions of dollars, and everybody else had to copy us or go out of business. And that's essentially, what happened with the footwear industry. And then from a shape perspective, Bill Bowerman's best wear tester was Kenny Moore, who had a severely deformed foot. He had a really long second and third toe.
Right.
And as a result, his feet were pointy. Well, Kenny Moore gave Bowerman the best feedback. He was by far the best wear tester. And
Right.
so Bowerman built the lasts of the first Nike shoes to Kenny Moore's feet,
Based on his feet.
because Kenny Moore gave the best feedback. And then he also found out Kenny Moore's feet, the last, when it's built on Kenny Moore's feet, it looks faster. It's pointy. It looks like a torpedo.
Right.
We're going to use that shape. And so that is really, in the modern age of, athletic shoes, zero research,
Yeah.
Zero concern for biomechanics, zero concern for functional, what's the word I'm looking for? Our anatomy,
Yeah.
you know. It was really just like, okay,
Yes.
this
So
is,
completely
this looks
no.
cool, and it makes lots of money,
Yeah,
basically.
looks cool. No sense of harmony with a human being,
No, not at all.
based
And
on the testimony of a man who had unusual shaped feet, shall we say?
yeah, 100%.
So
So,
that just that
and that
led
was
to
it. Everybody copied it, and we're
incredible.
off to the races. And then pretty soon, we get, just, a dozen or so years later, and all of a sudden we see this happening.
Yeah.
People's feet are no longer tracking straight, and some doctors are like, "Oh, that's bad," you
Mm.
know. Uh, and it's because shoes, we think it's because shoes have changed. Shoes are less stable. Their shoes are soft now, and the heels are up in the air now, and that creates instability. And what had actually happened too is people's feet had weakened as well,
Yeah.
because they had started putting arch support in shoes,
Yeah.
which frankly, I mean, honestly, if you're wearing normal shoes with a tapered toe box and an elevated heel, your arch doesn't work right. You need arch support. It
Yeah.
makes sense to put arch support in a typical shoe with a tapered toe box and an elevated heel.
Okay.
So
Yeah, I
again,
get that.
99% of shoes, you kind of got to have arch support in there, because unless you have
Because they're
really
not
strong
doing what
feet,
they should be.
your feet can't work right anyway. You need that
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Um, but essentially, what's happening is these doctors are seeing this, and they're like, this needs to be fixed. This is a problem. Humans didn't used to look like that when they walked and ran. And I mean, this really brings up a really super interesting thing to me, that I think people think is controversial, but I am yet to see anyone refute it. But it's essentially this idea that we as a species move differently now than we did 70 years ago. You go
Wow.
back prior to where we were wearing nice shoes all the time.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm just going to go and put the light on, by the way. Carry on
okay.
talking, please.
So yeah, you go back to this time,
Yeah.
and um,
That's
we
better.
move differently now, uh,
Yeah.
as a species. You look at humans and the way we walk and run in modern footwear, and the movement patterns we have adopted and that have now been passed on for a generation or two. And we don't look like humans looked in 1925, 100 years ago.
Wow.
We don't run the same. Now, you look at the statistics, 80+% of runners are overstriding to some degree or another. And you go look at that figure again in the Olympics 75 or 100 years ago, not even the Olympics, just look at random people running, runners
Yeah.
anywhere.
Yeah.
And that number is close to zero. Almost nobody was overstriding.
So we've created another industry then,
We have,
fixing
and
feet because of dodgy shoes.
well, and really, I mean, that overstriding actually translates more to shins, knees, hips, back problems.
Yeah. Yeah.
These injuries were not common, so we got to come back full circle here. I'm trying to think where we were going. Um, Kenny
Where was?
Moore's feet,
Yeah.
Nikes.
Yeah.
Um, Everybody copied it, and oh, and the doctor saying like this is a problem,
Yeah.
and they hadn't picked up on the overstriding thing yet. They hadn't seen this, but what Nike did is they didn't go, "Hey, we elevated the heel in the shoe and made the shoe extra pointy, and that made the arch not work, and so the feet are collapsing in now." No, 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 no. This is a genius marketing company, probably the best of all time, at least in the athletic space. They said,
Right.
"We created this problem. Now let's create a really cool technology to fix the problem."
Yeah.
And so then the shoe industry gave us stability or motion control, anti-pronation devices in shoes.
Okay.
And the really interesting thing there that people don't understand is no stability or motion control shoe has ever been shown to change what the foot is doing. They just make it look better from the outside. So, for example, when they put bone markers on people's feet and they
Yeah.
watch them walk or run, the biggest change ever observed, and this was from Martin Shorten at the Runner's World Shoe Gait Lab, and they've tested thousands of shoes over the years. The biggest change they observed was the Brooks Beast, which is widely considered to be the greatest motion control shoe of all time. It's called the Beast for a reason. It
Yeah.
stops motion. It changed the amount of pronation by 1 millimeter.
Wow. Yeah. That's
That
kind of
much.
irrelevant.
Absolutely irrelevant when we're talking about, feet that are moving in centimeters,
Yeah. Yeah.
in many cases. So even the Brooks Beast didn't change motion. It just made it look better from the outside. So again, when you go into the running store and you get that analysis and they show you the camera view from behind, hey, your feet aren't rolling in as much anymore. You're not pronating as much in this shoe. No, your feet are pronating the exact same amount. The shoe is making it look like they don't. The
Okay.
shoe is not pronating as much,
Right.
but the feet are doing the same thing. And that is, but again, just this genius marketing of like, hey, we added the raised heel in there that made people run inefficiently and poorly. We have that extra tapered toe box. Now the feet are collapsing in. Okay, we shouldn't go fix the things that actually cause the problem because there's no money there. We'll create these motion control devices.
Yeah.
And I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I don't think this was done um, in a mat on purpose. I don't think it was like,
They weren't
oh, look,
thinking.
yeah, it was more just like, okay, how do we solve the problem?
Yeah.
But they didn't go reverse engineer like they should have. And
And
that's the problem.
it seems
So
that nobody ever went, maybe the initial shoe design began this process of
yeah, I
change.
mean, really, all they had to do is go back 20 years at the
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
15 years even, and they would have seen like, oh, but they didn't have video to the degree we have now.
Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
it's really easy to go look at film from 15 years ago. We can find tons of stuff.
Yeah.
So
So then in comes Golden Harper, having clearly got some serious expertise here through, as a child, your understanding of feet and shoes. I'm guessing you studied a lot to do with foot mechanics, well, maybe whole body mechanics.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, after about 10 years at the store, I went to university and I realized, I mean, I had realized before this, we don't get any training.
Yeah.
We just get propaganda from shoe companies and insole
Yeah.
companies. Um, and their interest is in selling their stuff. So they literally train us how to sell their stuff. They don't train us what's best for our customers. It's under that guise, but that's not what's actually happening if we want to be
Sure.
honest about it.
Yeah.
And I know some of my fellow running store owners probably are hating me for talking about this way. But so the quality of service at a running store is incredibly dependent on the passion of the owner of the store and the manager of the store to do legitimate training
Yeah.
and not just training they're getting from shoe companies.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, at least in the US, I would say most running stores don't do anything above and beyond what what they're getting from most shoe and insole companies.
Yeah. What they've been handed.
Right. Because it's easy,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is really unfortunate. So yeah, I realized by the time I went off to university, it's all garbage, you know. And the reason I realized it is because I'd been working with people for 10 years and we have created a very loyal customer base, but we would do everything that the shoe and insole companies told us to do, and people still kept coming back with the same problems,
Right.
you know. And so, the same knee problem, the same shin splints, the same foot condition, whatever it
Yeah.
happened to be. Well,
Yeah.
that's frustrating. I hated that. I wanted to fix that. And if I was going to spend my life working at this running store, it had to get better.
Yeah.
And so I went on a mission to learn, okay, what do we do to fix this? About half my customers don't run. They're people that have chronic foot problems. They're walkers, they're standers, they work, their feet hurt. Okay.
Yeah.
And then something up chain usually hurts as a result. And then the
Mhm.
other half are serious runners, or they might not describe themselves as serious runners, but they run for help. And most of them, statistically speaking, have some sort of injury as well.
Yeah.
I got to get better at this. And I originally thought I was going to be a podiatrist. Uh,
Okay.
and Podiatrists are a little different in the US than they are in a lot of the world. Here, podiatrists do surgery.
Wow.
And so that's where they make most of their money, orthotics and surgery. So you can imagine where most treatment options go.
Yeah.
So I always tell people, if you got an acute injury, short-term problem, go to a podiatrist. But if you have a chronic foot condition, personally, and I say this with all respect, I know some great podiatrists here in the U.S. that I would absolutely send people to, but for the most part, again, podiatrists make their money on orthotics and surgery. So if you go into a podiatrist with a chronic foot condition, they're not going to take you down a natural path to heal it. They're not
Yeah.
going to reverse engineer and see where it came from and try and fix it. In most cases, they're going to take you to orthotics, which lead to surgery. Um, if they don't go to surgery immediately, and that's a problem in and of itself.
Mm.
And that's what I discovered as I was doing this. I was like, man, I don't want to do this. Plus, even though I'm at the running podiatrist that I'm shadowing, 90% of these patients are retired. And I mean, I love working with retired people now, but at the time, as a 20-year-old kid, I wanted to work with runners, like hardcore
Yeah.
runners.
Yeah.
And so I thought that wasn't for me. So I thought, okay, I'll be a physical therapist. And I went and studied to be a physical therapist. And same thing, I'm shadowing the running physical therapist. And again, still almost everybody they're working with is retired. And I was like, no, this isn't really working with young athletes either. This isn't what I want. So I decided, I'm just going to kind of take my own path at university. I took 9 years to get a 4-year degree. But I take what I say was the, chronic foot condition and running shoe major. And I just, basically I bounced around. I went to a couple different universities. And this is how I ended up out in Hawaii. And I
Yeah.
spent 2 years out there. And there's this Finnish professor and researcher out there, Joke Kokkonen, and he was fantastic. And he had actually done some research that my dad owned a toe strengthening machine that this guy had built. So imagine it's a weightlifting machine for your toes. So you think of those weightlifting machines with the cable, and they're connected to some weights, and you can put the
Yeah.
the thing in that makes the weight
Yeah.
heavier. Same
Yeah.
thing, and then you push down this bar with your toes, and the stronger your toes were, the more weight you could lift. So he had done this research with this researcher named Bangeter, and they found out, one of the arguably the biggest difference between the African runners and the elite American runners was that the African runners had much stronger feet, and particularly much stronger toes. And so they built this weightlifting machine for the toes to help American people get their feet stronger like the elite Africans.
Right.
And I love this. We had two of these. I think there was only 12 of them in the world, or 10 of them in the world. We had two. We had one at my house and one at the running store. And so I was familiar with this. I was like, I got to go out and spend some time with this guy. And I went out there and I ran as well on scholarship. And while I'm out there, I'm surrounded by Polynesians, and we were talking about enormous humans,
Yeah.
and they don't wear shoes. Most of them, they just wear
Okay.
slippas, or what we would call flip flops, if
Yeah.
they wear anything at all.
Yeah.
They're barefoot or in slippas most of the time, and they got most of them. A lot of them have flat feet, and their feet roll in, and everything all the propaganda I'd been taught growing up was like, okay, flat feet are a problem. Rolling in is a big problem. Non-supportive shoes is a big problem. And then you add weight on top of that. Being overweight compounds all that and makes it much worse. So I get there and I'm like, oh my gosh, I've been sent here. I've been sent here to fix these people. I know about this stuff.
Right.
And as I get to know them well, I have this moment. I think I mentioned this on Tetragrammaton as well, but there's this moment of like, hey, you know, I do feet, like, and biomechanics, and um, I noticed that your feet are flat and they roll in, and you don't wear supportive shoes. Like, tell me about your feet. And they would always be like, bro, what about my feet? And I'd be like, well, they must hurt,
Yeah.
like for 20 years of my life, I've basically been brainwashed that these people have to have painful feet, according to everything that every shoe and insole company has ever told me.
Yeah.
Nobody out there wears insoles. Are you kidding me? Um, You see insoles fitting in flip flops, you know, and I'd be like, yeah, tell me about your feet. Your feet must hurt. And they would just look at me like, brah, my feet don't hurt. Feet don't hurt, brah. You know, turns out nobody's feet hurt. And, except the ones that wore really supportive shoes, those were the ones whose feet hurt. And I was
Really?
like, okay, I'm already questioning it at this point. Don't get me wrong. Like I already knew it was kind of a racket, but at this point, that was just like I was living it, where I was just
Yeah.
literally surrounded by giant humans that
Yeah.
were barefoot most of the time or in flip flops and had flat feet, and it looked like they pronated too much, and they're all fine. And I was like, I have got to dig into this, and I start researching. And it turns out you go look at the billion people on the planet that don't wear modern footwear
Yeah.
all over the world. No chronic foot conditions. No plantar fasciitis, which we now call plantar fasciosis because there's
Yeah.
no itis. There's no inflammation
Yeah,
after
that's right.
7 to
Yeah.
10 days.
Yeah. Yeah.
No bunions, no neuromas, no metatarsalgia, no heel pain. All this stuff that's so common, basically non-existent. You know, um, that was fascinating to me.
Amazing.
And
Really.
so, long story short, I start running barefoot a bunch. I have the best running season of my life. Well, of my semi-adult life, I guess. It's
Yeah.
hard to top setting a world best when you're 12. I always joke that everything was downhill after that,
Yeah.
Yeah, I have this incredible running season. I'm running the most miles I've ever run. I'm not getting injured at all, and I'm running barefoot on the beach for up to 90 minutes at a time. And I'm going barefoot everywhere, all the time. And I'm like, this is the life,
So not even barefoot shoes. We're talking literally barefoot.
Yeah, for my running on the beach, literally barefoot is far superior to any barefoot style shoes.
Amazing.
In fact, there were no barefoot style shoes at the time.
Okay.
Outside
Yeah.
of Vibram Five Fingers had just come out.
Right.
So this is like 2007, 2008. Five Fingers launched in really 2006, and I had like the first ones ever. And we started carrying them at the store as a foot strengthening and running technique tool. We
Yeah.
didn't sell them as a shoe to replace traditional shoes. Had we known then what we know now, we would have told people wear these around is how you're going to get the biggest benefit.
Yeah.
Wear them on short and easy runs, which we were telling them to work on your technique and strengthen your feet. But we would have told them just wear them around casually to strengthen your feet as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this is where I'm at, and that's looking more and more realistic. But I also live in a world of reality, and I live in a world of moderation too. Our world is very like black or white. It's very extreme one way or the other. Like barefoot shoes or nothing, or this diet or nothing. It's always like very extreme, and I don't. My life experience hasn't shown me that works for the majority of people going to
Yeah.
these extremes.
Yeah.
And so I come back to the shoe store, and there's this moment of I don't believe in anything I'm selling.
Okay.
That's
I can
except
totally
for these
roll with
five
that.
fingers,
Yeah.
But those aren't practical. I can't take somebody who's been wearing shoes their whole life, put them in a pair of five fingers, and have them stop wearing their running shoes and start running in their five fingers
Yeah.
and expect good things to happen. In fact, we had a lot of people do that, and they had a lot of problems.
Yeah.
Um, and also, I was training for a Rocky 50-mile race in the mountains, in the Rocky Mountains, and
Okay.
trying to train for that in five fingers didn't work.
Right.
I mean, it just wasn't really possible. Could you complete the race? Maybe. It would take twice as long.
Yeah.
There was no way I was going to be able to run effectively without protection.
Yeah. Some protection. Yeah.
And so this is kind of what's buzzing around in my head. And my dad, due to his knee issue, I mean, he credits his entire success as a runner to teaching himself to run like a Kenyan, to
Yeah.
run with this efficient, low impact running technique that protected his knee.
Yeah.
So when you came into our store as a runner, there's a good chance my dad was going to give you a lesson on efficient, low impact running technique. And at this same time, I come back from Hawaii, slow motion video becomes available, meaning we can see high speed film lets us see slow motion really clearly. And we start filming people on the treadmill, which we didn't really like to use the treadmill at the store, but it's a nice way to look at a few things. And what we found is we'd put people in 5 fingers or watch them run barefoot. They run great. And then we'd film these same people in the shoes we had just sold them.
Yeah. Everything's gone wrong.
And it was, yeah, exactly. It was this moment of like, oh crap.
What are we doing?
And so my dad, this is his statement. People come in here and I teach them a lesson on how to protect their body and make running more fun and learn this efficient low impact running technique. And then I sell them a pair of shoes that basically undoes it every single time they wear them.
Yeah.
I get one shot at them, for
Yeah.
several minutes to teach them this lesson. And then the shoes get a shot at them every day to undo everything I've taught them.
Of course.
And that was that was the boiling over point. That was where it all tipped. And that's when I said, why?
Yeah. Now, right at this moment, this tipping point, you're not going to believe this, but we've got to stop.
Oh,
we've got to stop. I've got to go home. My daughter's ill. And,
oh no.
Not badly ill, but I've got to go home, rescue my wife because she's got a meeting to go to, which has just appeared and come up.
Okay.
So we're going to have to do a part 2, Golden, because
We'll do it.
Blowing my mind with this. It's incredible. I'm just going to stop it because I want to carry on having a quick chat with you. Everyone,
Yep.
part 2 will come up when Golden Eye's diaries coincide, which is sometimes a little challenging.
Fuel your body the way nature intended with Cornucopia premium organ meat supplements, sourced from grass-fed, pasture-raised, regeneratively farmed animals, packed with bioavailable nutrients your body craves. From liver and heart to spleen and kidney, each capsule delivers nature's most potent superfoods, boost vitality, support digestion, enhance performance naturally. Cornucopia, real nutrition, real results. Shop now at cornucopia.co.uk.